Welcome. This is Dr. Christopher Jones presenting a webinar regarding the Sustainable Development Goals and positive social change introduced to Walden students through a series of workshops at Walden residencies in the School of Public Policy and Administration. Many Walden students work within the UN system, for example, government ministries, international organizations, and UN agencies. The background of the workshops are also related to the Paris Agreement, the UN Framework Council on Climate Change and Sustainable Development Goals, established around 2015. There has been a long-standing group, part of Walden, the Principles for Responsible Management Education, the PRIME group, that allowed me to meet some of the folks involved at Walden, involved in the SDGs, including Dr. Lynn Wilson, who collaborated in the development of the workshops. The workshops were held during colloquia in 5 residencies during the 2018-2019 period. The workshops primarily were attended by residency 2 through 4, that is advanced residency students. The workshops averaged between 60 and 90 students with 4 to 5 faculty. The objectives basically were to help students understand better the meaning of positive social change, learn and understand the scope and history of the SDGs, understand and apply the SDGs to Walden dissertation topics, identify and evaluate relevant stakeholders, and envision and create local solutions with positive global consequences. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The workshop basically was designed to introduce students to the idea of positive social change, initially introducing them to the notion that the paradigm for global service has changed. Students are much more internationally oriented, concerned about climate change, and interested in positive social change and social justice issues. For the purposes of the workshop, I handed out SDGs in a long list so they could see what they were, and some abstracts taken from recent Walden dissertations from the School of Public Policy and Administration. The workshop is organized by breaking out small groups and asking small groups, first of all, which of the SDGs fit the topic of the abstracts they are given, and ask them to consider the second and third order impacts of social change for that dissertation. They are asked to consider who the stakeholders might be, and finally, to brainstorm to create taglines or bumper stickers, cartoons, or logos. The changing nature of global public service is the key initial takeaway. The idea that the context for global change, the context for international activities, whether through NGOs, mission work, through career service, are all changing in the world today. One of the biggest changes, of course, is climate change. The Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030 set out the Sustainable Development Goals and the targets to meet them. The other issue is how students work through their dissertations and tend to deal with social change at the end of the dissertation. It's the last element of the abstract. Oftentimes students think about social change implications only at the very end of the process. So we want to help students consider those social change implications earlier in the dissertation process. And finally, there's a takeaway from this webinar, and that is the idea that every student can potentially use the Sustainable Development Goals in their own dissertations when they address positive social change. Because as we found in the workshops, there's hardly a dissertation produced at Walden that does not have some positive social change implications and therefore align with at least one or more of the SDGs. This is a handout just so that they are able to see what the main 17 goals are. And the other handout for students in the small groups, this is a representative sample of approximately 6 to 8 different dissertation topics drawn from abstracts of Walden dissertations in the last 3 to 5 years. Then students are asked to take those abstracts and align them with the goals. Here's an example of a typical table where many of the goals are in alignment to some extent, either directly or indirectly, with the SDGs. The other issue that we ask students to consider is that their dissertations will not directly create social change. Their dissertations disseminate knowledge. Therefore, social change implications are necessarily second or third order impacts from the dissertation itself. They need to remember that they are promulgating their research and that there is no direct social change likely from that. But policymakers, decision makers will take their findings and recommendations, which will have an impact on social change. Therefore, we ask them to consider publication and dissemination. What kinds of things have changed in the world that might help them disseminate their information, their recommendations and findings? For example, social media is one of the things that students often consider. The different forms of social media that are emerging, such as LinkedIn and other academically oriented media to disseminate. They're asked to brainstorm that. They often come up with very unique ideas about how they might disseminate their work. The other thing they consider at one stage in the workshop is who the stakeholders are for that particular topic. Who are the interest groups, government agencies, public service groups that might have a stake in the dissemination of that information and potentially benefit from the positive social change. And lastly, they're asked, as I noted, to look at innovative ways to disseminate their dissertations. The last part of the workshop is reporting out, and we ask them to consider using their imagination and creativity to come up with cartoons, with logos, hashtags, any kind of media message, more than just words, or in addition to words that might help disseminate the social change implications. The idea is to connect global to local issues and create general awareness of the SDGs and positive social change. And in the last session, the energy levels in the room usually gets very high, and they produce the sort of illustrations that follow. This first one is from a dissertation on work within inner city areas in Jamaica. This has to do with energy renewal in the local and county government area. A similar cartoon for the same topic, produced by a number of students. They've signed their names. This was regarding mentoring in the military and the difference between gender mentoring. And the last series of images relate to global warming and the impact on agriculture. Thank you very much for your assistance in listening through this webinar. If you would like any copies of the handouts, illustrations, and how to organize one of the workshops, please drop me an email or give me a call.